Hi, everyone. We are here with Veronica Grant, and Veronica is a love and life coach. She's the host of the popular Love Life Connection podcast, and she's the author of You Are Meant for Love. And we're going to talk all about love and inner child and emotional availability and all the great things today. So, welcome, Veronica. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We need people like you in our lives to help us with these relationships, because relationships are like the hardest thing, I think,
They
in
are
life
hard.
a lot of the time. Yeah. So
Yeah.
will you start by just sharing with us a little bit about how you got into the work that you're doing in the world?
Yeah. So I think, a lot of people could probably relate. It was a roundabout way. I actually started as a health coach, and that was what my training was in. And I got into that because I struggled, as a lot of women do, with body image. And I didn't have a full blown eating disorder, but I would say I had some disordered eating for sure. I was constantly counting calories and, trying to always lose those last 5 to 10 pounds. I really believed that if I lost those last 5 to 10 pounds, that I could have whatever guy I wanted and basically would just be so happy and fulfilled in life. And so my life really revolved around that. And I kind of healed that on accident. Mostly I just had a job that was highly, highly stressful, and I literally didn't have time to count calories anymore. So then I stopped, and then I realized life was wonderful when I didn't. And through that allowed me to really relate to myself and connect to myself in a deeper way, which then opened up just doorways in terms of me being more emotionally available for the relationship that I wanted, because wanting a relationship is not the same thing as being really ready and available for that relationship. And so I started my business as a health coach thinking, oh, well, I did a lot of healing around my body image and getting off the diet train and all of that kind of stuff. So that's what I want to help people do. And so that's what I did. And a few things about that. One, I actually really hated it. I just got kind of tired of talking about that topic. Not that it's not important, just wasn't my thing. At the same time, I was getting a lot of comments to me like, oh, Veronica, I want you to help me lose weight so that I can feel more confident dating, or I don't want to date when I look like this, or put myself out there when I look like this. And I was thinking, okay, there's definitely like a disconnect here, because I'm pretty sure you don't want to be with someone who only is with you because you look a certain way or because you're at a certain size. And so kind of one thing led to another. I was working with a business coach at the time. She knew that I was just like really struggling with the health coaching and not really liking it. She was like, well, have you ever thought about relationship coaching? And I was like, no, that's not a thing. People don't, hire coaches for that. Turns out I was wrong. They do. And so that's kind of how I got into doing my work. And then also just one thing to add is, part of me wanting to transition from health coaching to relationship coaching was also really seeing that my whole thing around body and food and dieting and always trying to lose 5 more pounds or whatever actually had a direct impact on my love life. And they were very, closely intertwined for much of my life. It wasn't like there was this one thing over here and there's one thing over here. They impacted each other. And so my work today really also revolves around that. And even though my focus is certainly not body image or, you know, intuitive eating or whatever, that kind of stuff still obviously comes up a lot in the dating and relationship space.
Yeah. Oh, I love how you just bring it all back around. I mean, I had similar things I went through at a younger age, and in a roundabout way, that's why I'm here too. So I think it's cool I love hearing these stories from people about how they found really their passion in life and the stepping stones, right? That health coaching was such a stepping stone to help you like see what your like true passion lies in. So I think that's so powerful and beautiful. Um, yeah, I mean, inner child healing is something that I've done a lot of myself. I work on with clients, and just like you said, the way that we perceive ourselves, and if you want to call them have limiting beliefs about ourselves and the world around us, that completely can impact our ability to call in anything that we want, including a relationship.
Mhm.
So do you want to talk a little bit further on inner child healing and what that like means, and how
Yeah.
our childhood can really impact what our life looks like now.
Yeah. So in childhood, that's really the place where we learn how the world works, how relationships work, how you get things, how you don't get things, if life is supposed to be hard, if life is supposed to be easy, if money is good or bad, men are good or bad. Like all of those things are things that we learn in childhood. And sometimes things are very directly said, like perhaps you had a mom who was always like, you don't need men or you can't trust men. So that would certainly have an impact, in your adulthood. Or maybe it was something that was unsaid, but maybe you saw your mom kind of just lose herself in her relationship with your dad. And so then, you might carry on some of those same patterns and habits as well. So no matter what your childhood was, I think obviously it can feel a little bit more obvious if you've had like capital T trauma in your childhoods, like so any kind of untimely death, divorce, a huge drastic change in like money or something like that, like if a parent lost like a job and they're the sole breadwinner, it can feel a little more obvious about how that would impact your adulthood as an adult. But the truth is that we all learn things in our childhood and we take them on as universal truth, and they may or may not be actually true. But when we operate in the world as an adult as if it was true, that is what I call a block. So let me give you an example and break that down a little bit. Let's say you grew up in a house where, mom just had a temper, and I'm not saying it was abuse. It was just a temper, and it was scary when your mom would just explode and you really know what would make her explode. And so you kind of just learn to walk on eggshells and to not really ask for anything or say what you really thought or what you really felt, because you never knew what might set off mom's temper. Now, as a child, you needed to do that because you needed to feel that sense of safety. That's a normal human need. But if you didn't unlearn that and heal that and work through that as an adult, there's a good chance that you might just believe that it's wrong or bad or not even safe to ask for what you want or what you need in a relationship. And so then you find yourself kind of walking on eggshells or bending over backwards to please people or make people happy or take care of them, all in the name of just like, oh, don't set them off. So you're playing this thing out with mom in a adult romantic relationship. But honestly, like this can also happen in platonic relationships, friendships, co-working relationships, employer, employee, all that kind of stuff. So it's not necessarily only going to be impacting your romantic relationships, but that's basically how it can, translate to adulthood. So what you have to do when inner child healing comes in is you have to go back. Well, first you have to understand what the pattern is. How do I show up in relationships, or what are the core beliefs that drive my relationships? So maybe a core belief is it's not safe to ask for what I want. It's not safe to ask for what I need. Or I should just keep my mouth shut, or whatever that core belief is. And then you ask yourself, okay, where did I hear that before? Or when's the first time I heard that? Or when have I felt like this before? Like any question along those lines will help you connect the dots back to an origin. Like, oh, I can remember, never wanting to, tell my mom how I felt about XYZ. And so I can remember just going into my room and like reading my books or listening to my music and just kind of getting lost in that or whatever. So then inner child healing is going back to that little 8-year-old, 10-year-old, 5-year-old, however old she was in that memory, and basically being the grown-up and being like, look, I know you're feeling scared. I know you're feeling nervous. I know you're feeling unsafe, or whatever it is that she's feeling, and just really being with her, letting her feel what she's feeling, reparenting her, being the parent in the room, and helping her to essentially put a different pair of glasses on so that now she can look at a relationship and be like, oh, it's actually safe to ask for what I want. It's actually safe to show up and take up space in this relationship and make myself known or make myself seen. Yeah, of course that might create rejection because when you ask for what you want, there's either a yes or there's a no. But the inner child work helps you to see that it's safe. And that this isn't your mom or not your mom's house anymore. And so from there, we can begin to slowly unravel ourselves from these patterns so that we can then be in healthier, happier relationships. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so well said. And it makes a ton of sense. Yeah. Yeah. What would you say? I obviously people come from many different backgrounds with everyone's different. Everyone's had a unique story in its own way. While some of us have gone through similar things, it's always different. Are there certain dating narratives that you see more often than not? Let's say maybe for those who are having trouble finding a partnership, like they've been wanting a partnership for a while, maybe even years, and they haven't been able to find that. And are there specific narratives that you kind of see pop up time and time again, or would it be
Yeah.
very
So,
different?
yeah. So, like I said, like in terms of like the narrative that you tell yourself about relationships, like, oh, relationships are hard, can't trust men or whatever, like that tends to be very specific to each individual and depending on what their upbringing and their background is like. But that being said, I do think there are some more common, I don't want to say universal, but more common ways in which we approach relationships. So the biggest one, well, there's kind of two big ones, but they're related. So one is not understanding the difference between wanting a relationship and being available for the relationship that you want. I grew up my entire life, or at least not my entire life, but like from like the age 10 or 11, I desperately wanted to be married. I know I'm like literally 11-year-old, but like that's all I could think about. And I just really wanted that from a young age. I wanted to meet my person, if not in high school, definitely college. Um, and then just like have that happily ever after. But what I learned the hard way was that is not the same thing as being emotionally available for the relationship. Because what ended up happening is the only people that I was able to really connect with were people that were not really emotionally available, because that was a language and an energy that I understood and also felt safer. And when someone was actually willing to like really see me and, share their emotions, I was like, whoa. For one reason or another, like that just scared me, and then I'd always push that away. So that's the first thing, is just understanding that wanting a relationship is not the same thing as being available for it. And then the other closely related thing is assuming that everyone else, like, especially, I mean, most common, it almost feels like a cliche, but that's just because it's super common. That is like attracting emotionally unavailable partners and being frustrated around that. And again, this is related to the first thing that I said, but I think the common mistake or misconception is, well, I'm just attracting all these emotionally unavailable people, so dating just sucks, or it's really hard because now it's like, what's the diamond in the haystack or the needle in the haystack? Like I have to look for a needle in the haystack to find the emotionally available person. When the truth is that, just like, with my story, there's a good chance that if you're attracting emotionally unavailable people over and over and over again, there's a good chance you're also emotionally unavailable. And that can sometimes be a little bit of a hard pill to swallow. And again, this is true no matter what your specific belief or pattern or childhood was that would create some of the dynamics that you might be experiencing in relationships. But I think that, and I'm going to talk just for heterosexual relationships for the moment. I think that as a woman seeking a straight man, there are very stereotypical emotional unavailability qualities in that. So like an unemotionally available man is kind of aloof, doesn't want to talk about emotions, non-committal, just wants sex, like all of that. And yeah, like those are attributes of being emotionally unavailable for sure. But there are other ways to be emotionally unavailable, but they're not usually, again, stereotypically ways in which men interact in a relationship. And they tend to be ways that women are socialized or conditioned to act in a relationship. And so these are less stereotypical ways, but they're still being emotionally unavailable. We just don't see it because, like, I don't know, there aren't rom-coms about it. Like every rom-com is about the emotionally unavailable guy, and just the way that I described, becoming emotionally available, but like not asking for what you want, not saying how you feel, waiting for the other person to make all the moves. Like these are all ways in which you're actually being emotionally unavailable. And so I think these two areas, in combination of being emotionally unavailable but not realizing it, and also understanding the difference between wanting a relationship and being ready for it, those two things I think are some of the biggest universal factors that affect a lot of women who struggle in relationships.
Yeah. I feel like it's like, it's a mirror, right? What you're seeing reflected back to you is like the energy you're putting out too. So say that someone comes upon that realization, like, okay, I'm attracting unemotionally available people. Therefore, I am emotionally unavailable as well. What tips do you give, maybe a tip or two that you give your clients to start to become more emotionally unavailable? I Obviously the inner child healing is going to be one piece of it, but is there anything else or anything you want to expand on with that?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, it kind of depends on like what the situation is.
Mhm.
Sometimes I'll have a client that is just so focused on like, need to meet someone, need to meet someone, need to meet someone. And so for them, I'd be like, all right, let's take a step back from dating and like maybe don't go on the apps and don't go on a date or have sex with anyone for the next 60 days or whatever. And if that feels impossible or like really scary or really hard, then that would probably be a really good first step, because then we can think about, okay, well, what void were the apps or the sex with people or like all those first dates actually filling? And then we can begin to, begin to do the inner child work from there and really understand emotionally what those actions were filling in. Now, if it's a client or someone who, hasn't dated in years or, hasn't put themselves out there at all, I would encourage them to maybe do something about that. You know what I mean? And so those are like two clearly opposite pieces of advice or next steps, but that's just because like everyone has a different situation that they're dealing with. But it does go back to inner child work, like whatever you're experiencing, whatever is going on for you in your patterning or in your relationships, the question is why, or not even just why, but it's more of like, from where am I attracting this kind of partner? I don't want that to get misconstrued as like, oh, I'm broken or I caused this or I manifested this, because I think that can be a little bit toxic sometimes. But it's more of just like, okay, am I attracting this relationship from the part of me that felt abandoned by my mom because she was too busy doing XYZ? Or for me, I was attracting relationships through external validation. And so that was a way that I got a lot of praise growing up, like through grades. If I was looking skinnier, like the women in my family would always say something like, oh, you're looking skinny, Veronica. And like that would give me validation. And I confused validation for feeling love. You know what I mean? And so then as an adult, that was how I was able to feel good. And so, it's not surprising then from that place, I was attracting a lot of guys who really just kind of wanted to hook up and not do a lot else. Because again, it was like that external validation through my body that I was getting with the person, which in the very short term felt good, but like always in the long term made me feel like crap because I wasn't really getting what I wanted. So the question is, why am I attracting this, or from where am I attracting this? And then it's just getting curious and not being really judgmental about it or blaming yourself. Like, you don't want to do any of that kind of stuff, but it's just being curious, just being open-minded, open-hearted. Okay, why am I attracting this? Where is this coming from? And then from there, doing the inner child work to shift it.
Love it. Yeah. So powerful. Um, Before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you, I think from hearing what you're saying, anyone could really take what you're saying about if you're single and looking for a partnership into what if you're already in a committed partnership, a marriage or a long-term relationship. I think you can still take all of that and kind of transfer a lot of it over. But is
Totally.
there anything else you want to touch on as far as for those people who are already in a committed partnership and they notice that they still have some unhelpful narratives that are hindering the
Yeah.
connection and the depth and all of that?
Yeah. And I'm glad you asked this, because I always tell people, unless I'm literally talking about online dating, which I don't talk about that much, but I do sometimes, but unless I'm literally talking about something along those lines, everything that I teach applies to you, whether you are getting out of a relationship, completely single, in a kind of sort of relationship, or in a full blown committed partnership, because it's really all just about you and how you get your needs met. Ultimately, this comes back down to feeling loved, safe, and like you belong. As humans, everyone needs to feel like this. I do think that it is wired in our DNA. I mean, if you think about like how humans evolved, we used to be like in packs. And so if you were ousted from the pack, that was like a death sentence essentially. And so the humans who survived and carried on the genes, had this like very instinctual need to feel loved, safe, and like you belong. And so there's going to be times, especially when you're a child, when you didn't feel like you were loved, safe, or belong, that creates a pattern. So I don't have to go back into that, but there will be times even in your relationship where you don't feel those things. It doesn't mean the relationship's bad or it's a huge, bunch of red flags or anything like that. It just means, okay, I'm not feeling what I need to feel in a relationship. So you kind of ask yourself the same question. Where is this coming from? What is this really about? Obviously, like, you want your partner to make you feel love, safe, and belonging, or like all the other things that you want to feel in a relationship, but they can't be your sole source of feeling those things, because that does create a recipe for codependent relationships, even abusive or toxic relationships. So what you have to do is, okay, what part of this is on my side of the street that I need to clean up? And what part of this is, a need that I have from the partner? This is not a black and white answer. It's not always, I mean, sometimes it can be a little bit more clear rather than not, but for the most part, there's no right, answer or right way to do that. And I do think that people will have different needs just based on who they are and how they were born. And that's why, a relationship is not one size fits all. But the more that you're able to get clear on, okay, what is this? Is this just my stuff, like my stuff that I'm projecting onto my partner? Or is this something that we really need to talk about and have some boundaries or agreements around it? And then, if that is the case, then you can go to your partner and say, hey, this isn't working for me. I need to feel da, 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 or whatever it is, and then you can have a conversation from there. The other thing I will say, and this has been so helpful in my marriage to my husband, especially after we had a kid, but I think it'll be helpful no matter what your status is. I think you can even apply this to someone that you're not living with, but when you're in a relationship, like especially like a committed relationship, you're going to have, like, at that point, like, it's not just about like the relationship and the romance and all that stuff. Like you're agreeing to build a life together and to do life together. And so by agreeing to do life together, you're going to have to figure out ways that you can both eat, that you can both pay the bills, and that you can clean your house or wherever you live. So there's going to be like some of that more mundane stuff that goes along with being in a relationship. And the more that you can be crystal clear around who does what, who pays for what, who does the dishes, who walks the dog, who vacuums, who, does whatever. And you can just be crystal clear, like literally maybe spend a weekend together with a big spreadsheet, write out who does what, who pays for what, how it doesn't have to be equal, but it has to be equitable. And then just like let that part of your relationship or just let that get super, super, so crystal clear, it's literally written down in a document somewhere, then I think that will benefit the romantic part of the relationship, which is the whole reason why you got together in the first place. Because I find what happens is, the dishes are in the sink for like the fifth night in a row, and you're kind of pissed about it, and the other person thinks it's your job, and then like it's unclear like who's supposed to do what, and then like no one's having sex like that, you know what I mean? So like, so it kind of can feel like a little like soulless or heartless to like have this like literally just like a business conversation. Like it's like you're two business partners and you're like, all right, who's doing what? How are we divvying this up? How are we paying this? Like, you're talking about property, you're talking about tasks, and you're talking about money. That sounds like a business to me. But like the more you can actually like have that conversation, then the more it can just kind of stay over in its corner, and then let your actual romantic part of your relationship fill the rest of the space. And then that way, if there are dishes in the sink, it's super clear as to whose job that was supposed to be, because you've been really clear. And then that person will be like, oh shoot, that was my bad, I will get the dishes or whatever. And then everyone just stays happier and healthier. And it just, I don't know about healthier, I mean, I guess healthier, but definitely happier.
Happiness, health.
That's true. That's true. Happiness, health. And that's how I really think like relationships can thrive over the long term. And even if you don't live together with your partner, I still think you can have a conversation, because you're still probably needing to have conversations around who pays for what when you go out, and like how to divvy up all of that, or if you go on vacations together, or how much time you see each other or talk to each other during the week when you're not each other's places or whatever. So there's still like some logistical things to work out, even if you don't literally like have a piece of property or renting a piece of property with your partner. And I think the less like gray area or unknowns there are there, then, the better off that relationship can be too, and giving it a really wonderful foundation for if you do eventually get married and maybe even have a kid, which is going to add a whole other host of responsibilities. It's a really great foundation to build from.
Yeah, I love that. Such great tangible advice. And yeah, this is great. I love that anyone, no matter where they're at in their love life, can listen to this and really take something away from it, that they can move forward into their year of you with. So thank you, Veronica. Can you tell us what your freebie is going to be?
Yeah. So my freebie is my emotional availability assessment. So I talked a little bit earlier about how I thought I wanted a relationship and that was enough, but clearly it wasn't. And so I created an assessment to help you get really clear on how emotionally available you really are. So you can think of it as like those, magazine quizzes from like Cosmo or whatever. You take the assessment, you add up your score at the end, and then depending on your score, I've got some next steps and resources for you so that you can become emotionally available or more emotionally available for the relationship you want.
Perfect. And that will be linked on the landing page with all of your links and everything else. So thank you so much for your time, for sharing your amazing wisdom with us and inspiring us as we go into this new year.
Thanks so much for having me. This was fun.